What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be talking about the Bell Witch. Now, thank you guys so much for being patient with me as I got some things done in my other office and dealing with the echo and the loud heat and all the different places I've been filming, but we're going back to normal next week, so thanks so much for hanging in there and bearing with me. Whatever I film today is the last of what's going to be filmed in this room for quite a while. So, as I always like to start out by saying, in this community, we cover so much of the unexplained, right? Just in general, and mainly speaking now of hauntings in particular, there are so many that are almost unfathomable, and at the end of the day, no matter how many supposed facts or what credible evidence we come across or discuss in these videos, they leave us scratching our heads and wonder, could something like this have really happened? Did something like this really happen? What's the meaning behind it? Why did it happen, and why did it happen to the people that it happened to? There are some that just really stay with us and stick in our memory, haunting us by popping up in our thoughts when awake, daydreams, and nightmares alike. Just the mere mention of the case or some part of it brings with it an overwhelming sense of fear, evil, and even sometimes an unshakable dread. Mysterious Universe describes it as, quote, a profoundly menacing haunting carried out by some wicked, unknown thing that has gone on to be one of the most famous ghostly encounters in American history, end quote. Some would say that that last part is debatable, but I don't think so. Many people, both recently and far into the past of YouTube, have covered the case of the Bell Witch. I pride myself, however, on bringing you all the whole, ugly, uncut, and raw truth of the situation. The real, capital R-E-A-L story. So buckle in as we take a nosedive right into the ugliness and depths of the abyss. Let's see what we come up with. In 1804, a farmer named John William Bell, along with his wife Lucy, moved onto some land in a very rural part of northern Tennessee, specifically Robertson County. Back then, though, it was called the Red River and would become the town of Adams. The humble farmer and his faithful wife worked the land themselves and would eventually go on to have 8 kids. God bless them. For years, the family lived in peace. They lived a simple and happy life with 8 healthy kids and happy, lovingly committed parents. They wanted for nothing more, and they seemingly had it all as far as rural farmers and their farms and families went back then. However, 13 years after they acquired and moved onto the land, some very strange things started happening. Where did it come from? Why had it chosen this particular and seemingly normal, happy, well-adjusted family? What did it want? Whatever the answers to these questions are, we may never know, but what I do know is that it would change the lives of every single one of the Bells forever, and in the world of the paranormal and hauntings, it would change the way we all looked at things once we heard the sinister tale. Again, depending on what you believe, but it seemingly all started one night when John was out for a walk around the property. He normally took walks around just to kind of clear his head, get some fresh country night air, I guess, when he saw what he described as a large dog-like creature with a rabbit's head lurking around his farm, seemingly trying to stay in the shadows. So startled was John Bell that he fired on the strange beast without hesitation. As the shot apparently hit it, though, it didn't fall to the ground and die. It wasn't even injured, or at least as far as he could see, because it just disappeared. In the next few weeks, the slaves on the property would tell the Bells they were seeing this gigantic black dog on the farm, simply roaming around ominously and then disappearing into thin air again when it realized it had been spotted. One of them even claimed that the creature had followed him around for an entire day as he went about his work in chores. These weren't the only odd entities that were spotted in, near, and around the Bell farm at this time either. The family and slaves both reported seeing a lot of other things, and I'll name some of them here, but the list was like massive. So there were things such as a huge and dreadful looking bird that gave off a more creepy than dangerous vibe. A young girl dressed in green was seen swinging from a tree branch by one of the Bell children, their daughter Elizabeth, whom most called Betsy. While this may seem terrifying enough to most of us, it wasn't by any stretch the only odd and frightening things happening on the Bell farm or in the farmhouse at this time. The family and the farmhouse began to be engulfed up to their ears, so to speak, in other forms of paranormal activity as well. Like with almost all hauntings, it started with the small stuff, things moving from where they were always kept and reappearing somewhere else just minutes or seconds later, strange noises that seemed to come from nowhere and definitely somewhere all at once. Things going bump and bang in the night, and an oppressive feeling of thickness in the air started to make the family feel claustrophobic in their already crowded home. Remember, there were 10 people in this farmhouse. and it was actually referred to oftentimes as a hut. They couldn't quite put their finger on that last part though, but being who I am and knowing what I know, it's a terrible feeling that, along with everything else, kept the family awake most nights. After a short while, though, the activity became more menacing, with the sounds of chains rattling and a woman's disembodied voice laughing or singing being heard constantly. Try as they may, neither the bells nor their slaves could ever find the source of any of the sounds. This is probably due to the fact that things like this come from unknown realms, places unknown to most of us at least, or at least those among us who are, or at least feel, blessed. The disturbances got louder and louder as each night passed, and eventually it all heightened in intensity and terror. It became a full-blown haunting by something evil, menacing, and possibly even demonic. Blankets were pulled off of beds immediately after they were made, or even while someone was lying under them. Objects, both small and large, inexplicably flew across the house and continued to be hidden and moved all over the place. Some of these things were done with such violent force it angered more than scared some of the men in the family. The bells unfortunately had no clue what it was they were dealing with here, and this is most likely the reason for what unfortunately happened next. Aside from things being knocked and even smacked out of people's hands, there began to be violent physical assaults on family members. Just like with the haunting in the first place, it started off as slight shoves and pushes, but very quickly escalated to hard pinches, punches, kicks, and slaps. It was as though an actual human being were there instead of some unseen phantom or force beating the crap out of anyone that it came into contact with. After all, how can you fight back when you cannot even see or even sense your opponent? The entity would pull hair, leave welts, scratches, scrapes, and giant painful bruises as evidence of its assaults. All of the family members were targeted at one point or another, but it seemed as though poor Betsy got the brunt of the abuse and the harassment. At one point, she even began to be stuck with tiny pins all over her body, on top of the frequent major injuries she would suffer from all of the violence aimed at her from this apparition or this force. The only person this entity, or whatever you want to call it, would leave alone, and who was never really attacked or hurt in any way, or really even bothered at all, was little Lucy Bell. It seemed that whatever this thing was, it was indifferent, or even, if you really think about what was happening to everyone else, friendly towards her. Most of us can imagine how it was back in those days, especially in rural farmlands and small towns. It wasn't really a good thing to be talking in public or even outside of your family, unless you wanted to be shunned or possibly lose your life, about hauntings. So John Bell at first tried to do the rational and seemingly most safe thing to do and keep all that was happening inside of his home right there, inside his home and within his own family. However, it all became so horrifying, the aggression and violence constantly aimed at him and his family, he finally decided they had no choice but to look elsewhere for help for his terrified family. It was absolutely relentless, and though some might think it unwise, I am sure he thought he was doing what was best for his family. One of the first people he went to was a neighbor of theirs named James Johnson. It said that Mr. Johnson had witnessed some of the phenomenon with his own eyes while visiting John and the family. James thought that the entity, whatever it was, had to be intelligence to be able to carry out such relentless and calculating attacks on so many people for such a long period of time. He thought for sure if spoken to and given the chance to speak back, the entity would respond and perhaps explain itself. He thought for sure if spoken to and given the chance to speak back, the entity would respond and perhaps explain itself. He also figured they could find out who this quote-unquote ghost was, and then the family could make whatever amends or do whatever was necessary to get rid of or at least placate it. To make whatever they had done to wrong it right, in other words. Back then, when things like this happened, people believed it was always the fault of the person or people experiencing the phenomenon, and there was almost no room for persuasion otherwise. I just want to mention here quick that this guy had the idea that whatever this was still had some humanity, and I say that not because of anything I've read or any evidence I found, but simply because it seems he thought that by speaking to who or whatever this was, they would do the polite thing to do and not only speak back but properly introduce itself or themselves. This absolutely blows my mind, but then again, not everyone has seen or been through what we in this community have. It seems though, despite how unbelievable it seemed to me in the beginning, the Bells were being haunted by at least one entity who was willing to converse with them. In fact, this female entity was quite the gossip. Some would even say she was a chatterbox, as she constantly and randomly, at all hours of the day and night, began to give long sermons from the Bible, and would even blather and gossip about what all of the neighbors were saying and doing behind closed doors. She would mimic people's voices, anyone known to the bells at this time. She would do this perfectly, and there was no way to ever distinguish between when the entity was calling you or the actual person who was so beautifully mimicking. Finally, the spirit introduced herself as Kate Batts, a known and self-proclaimed witch. Kate Batts had been a neighbor of the bells in life and had sworn to haunt and hunt them down for perceived slights they performed against her in life. I'm not sure exactly what all these slights were, but we all have had or have a neighbor like this, even at one point in our lives, right? One of the things she was so pissed about and out for revenge for was some dealing she had over a slave with the bells, where she felt she was given a raw deal. This woman was both in death and life cruel, malicious, and relentless, and attached herself to the Bell family like some sort of leech or parasite. Despite learning all of this about the apparition of the witch, there was no stopping or even slowing down the haunting. In fact, once she made herself known, she seemed to take even more pleasure in instigating her vicious and often brutal attacks on the family, with Betsy still receiving the worst of it. She became more aggressive as time wore on, and the bells were at the end of their rope. They lived in constant fear and terror, never knowing what was going to happen to who or when next. Of course, same as today, and as they do, rumors abound about the haunting of the bells, and with it came a somewhat macabre and morbid curiosity throughout the neighborhood and town that the family had lived in. Thrill seekers from not only the town but the region in general would travel for miles and miles to the Bell farm just to catch a glimpse of the family and hopefully the apparition herself. This is where the name the Bell Witch came from. According to almost all of the versions of this haunting I have come across and read about, so notorious would this particular haunting become that it even caught the interest of General Andrew Jackson, a man who would eventually become president. Of course, General Jackson was skeptical at first, or at least knew he had to pretend to be. I'm not sure which one. I think he actually was a real skeptic. Eventually, though, his curiosity got the better of him, and he actually ended up taking the trip to the farm himself to see firsthand what was happening there. The tale is told with the general making the trip with some friends and all of them laughing and joking along the way about what fun they would have at the expense of the bells. They just didn't really believe in hauntings and such things and were simply out for an easy and fun adventure. Thrill seekers, if you will. Imagine their surprise when they had something quite peculiar and scary happen to them along the way. It's claimed this happened right as the group approached the farm before they even got onto the property itself. I'm going to switch for a minute and give you what I believe to be one of the most accurate accounts of what happened to the general and his friends from a book written in 1894 specifically about this case. The author is N.B. Ingram, and the title is An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch. It describes the events as follows. Quote, "Just then, traveling over a smooth level piece of road, the wagon halted and stuck fast. The driver popped his whip, whooped, and shouted to the team, and the horses pulled with all of their might, but could not move the wagon an inch. It was dead stuck, as if welded to the earth. General Jackson commanded all men to dismount and put their shoulders to the wheels and give the wagon a push, but all in vain. It was no go. The wheels were then taken off one at a time and examined and found to be all right, revolving easily on the axles. General Jackson, after a few moments' thought, realizing that they were in a fix, threw up his hands, exclaiming, 'By the eternal, boys, it is the witch.' Then came the sound of a sharp, metallic voice from the bushes saying, quote, 'All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight,' end quote. The men in bewildered astonishment looked into every direction to see if they could discover from whence came the strange voice, but could find no explanation to the mystery. The horses then started unexpectedly of their own accord, and the wagon rolled along as light and smoothly as ever," end quote. Though understandably upset, Andrew Jackson still wasn't convinced anything paranormal was going on and needed to see for himself firsthand. He was a major general after all and didn't spook easily. It would take more than this to scare him off, and so he and his men proceeded. He actually ended up spending a night at the farm with the bells, his curiosity at a peak by this point. Apparently, the witch kept her promise of seeing him again that night. According to most versions of the tale, he and the men he rode in with were importuned by the spirit. The whole night was spent with them being violently slapped, kicked, punched, pushed, and pinched. She would scream in their faces. So close was she that they could almost feel her breath in their face, only they could not see her at all. She even went so far as to rip their blankets off of each one of the men all night long, allowing them no warmth, comfort, or peace of any kind the entire time they visited. By this time, the general was quote-unquote freaked out by not only the fact that the haunting was real, but by the mere savagery of it all. He is said to have stated as he left the home, quote, "I'd rather fight the British in New Orleans than to have to fight the Bell Witch," end quote. Maybe he said this and maybe he didn't, but his visit and the terror and violence that ensued is documented fact. After Jackson, there is said to have been some unnamed Englishmen who made the long journey to America and the Bell Farm with the only goal of debunking the Bell Witch haunting altogether. He was a staunch skeptic, unswayable, unmovable, obviously, and he too got a lot more than he bargained for this time. The Bell Witch was true to form and wasted no time, as it's reported that the first night the man was there, she started harassing him and the family by perfectly mimicking his voice. Her accent in mimicking him and the pitch were dead on, and there was no way for even the man to be able to tell the difference. Side note, I just want to explain, as someone who has dealt with this a lot in my life, it's extremely eerie and creepy when a spirit mimics a living person, and they often do this as a lure. They may use your young child's voice to get you into the basement or deeper into the woods, or simply mimic a woman screaming in the woods behind your house. It allows them to take on a bit of your essence as well, and in almost all cases, if not all actually, a spirit of light and peace would have no need to do something like this. So after this man finally fell asleep for the night, he went running and screaming out of the farmhouse as soon as the sun was up, after the witch started mimicking not only the man, but his parents as well. His parents were back in England, and while I don't know if they were alive or deceased, this seems to have pushed the man over the edge of belief, as he figured there was no way the Bells could have faked this, for how in the world would they have known exactly what his parents' voices sounded like? And that's kind of one of the most reasonable thoughts any of these skeptics have had so far, right? Before the man left, though, he did apologize to the Bells for not believing them and for coming there with such doubt that his intentions were to debunk the haunting and make fools of them with exposure. This haunting, seemingly only by the entity claiming to be the witch, would go on for years. It seems to me that this was not the Bells' old ornery neighbor with an axe to grind at all, due to the reports of the creatures, hellhounds, and other various beasties originally spotted. I think this could very well have been what they called back then witch, only in the sense that whatever it was seemed to be from the very depths of the abyss and bowels of hell. Anyways, the haunting would get increasingly violent, and there was eventually almost never a moment of peace for the family. Like, no peace at all. It came to a head when John Bell suddenly fell into a coma and eventually died in December of 1820. Just 3 years after the haunting had begun, and 16 years after moving onto the property in the first place. Presumably the stress of it all cost John Bell his life, or that's what it seems like. It's alleged by most authors and historians alike that a bottle of poison was found right next to his unresponsive and nameless body. Others say the bottle was found in the family's medicine cabinet, but by all accounts, one thing almost everyone will agree on is that the witch would gloat cheerfully and with a sickening glee about her voice that she spoon-fed John the poison herself while he slept, and it had the desired effect in the end. It killed him. At John's funeral, the witch continued her assault on him and his family. She relentlessly cackled and giggled maniacally. She even was heard singing with joy and happiness in her tone all throughout the funeral. She apparently did this in front of all of the guests as well, and she appeared to them. They all not only heard but saw this evil thing as it tormented the family in their time of great mourning and grief. After this, there was the issue of Betsy's fiance running off on her and canceling the engagement and wedding. The Bell Witch took great pride in the role she claimed to have played in that situation. She would tell anyone who would listen how she tormented the poor guy Betsy was engaged to. His name was Joshua Gardner, and she said she had cursed him with a never-ending feeling of, quote, a sharp stick in the mouth, end quote, which caused him constant and unending attacks of choking. Right after the disintegration of the pending marriage, the witch was seemingly satisfied with the damage she had done and the insurmountable pain, terror, and horror she had caused this family and anyone in her general vicinity. She announced that she would be going away then, but only for a little while, as in 7 years' time she proclaimed she would return to continue her egregious attacks on this poor family. True to her word, all of the paranormal activity in, near, and around the Bells and their farm stopped, only to recommence in 1928, exactly 7 years after she appeared before them and promised the 7 years of peace. In 1928, it seems as though the witch was perhaps bored with these people, at least in my opinion, because she only stayed a brief, though very unwelcome, stint with them that time. She terrorized them a bit, but mostly made horrific and horrifying predictions about what was to come of each member of the family in the near and distant future. Before leaving this time, she stated she would again appear in 1935, though no one knows if she kept that particular promise. Just because it seems as though she stopped haunting the bells, that by no means meant the end of her reign of terror. This is where we get into the heart of the legends surrounding this very real and factually backed up case. It's claimed that the witch never actually went away and instead took up residence in a cave nearby the Red River, which was in close proximity to the Bells farmhouse. This place is said to also be on Native American burial ground of all things, and the witch allegedly still makes her home there to this day. This is just some of the countless things that are said to have happened to people in this area, or even to those who were brave enough to encroach on the witch's turf. People have claimed to have heard evil cackling and laughing, rasping, moaning, and even wheezing. There are reports of a sinister voice of an old woman calling to them from the darkness of the cave and surrounding areas at night. People who were said to have been in the area either looking for a thrill or innocently roaming around have claimed to have been punched, pinched, kicked, slapped, smacked, and even had their hair pulled, as so often had happened to Betsy Bell. This is actually said to still be happening in and around the area of the cave. The more extreme phenomenon reported are people being paralyzed and frozen in place, unable to move, and feeling as though some massive weight had been dropped on them, or being squeezed to the point of not being able to breathe, like a vice grip being wrapped around their chests and bodies. There are still to this day reports of a haggard-looking old woman roaming around the woods, and that cave over there near the Red River, it's said to have even regular woodland animals like deer and squirrels who can't be seen or found in and around that particular area. There's a rather notorious legend. Well, the Bell Witch herself is indeed a rather notorious legend, but this one seemingly and sometimes more so. Legend has it that if you take anything from the cave she is said to reside in, even a small twig or pebble, you'll be sorry. It's said that if you quote-unquote steal from her cave, you will be haunted, have a run of terrible bad luck and misfortune, and or you could even possibly die. Almost every single account I've come across and that are told about this haunting has the witch being a violent and malevolent, hell-bent on hurting and tormenting humans. However, there is at least one story of a little child being saved by the witch when he or she fell into the cave and was almost stuck there. It said this entity, or the witch, helped the child back out of the cave and led it on its way back to where it could be found safely. She's said to not only have pulled the little kid out, but to have also lectured him or her about safety and gave tips on how to explore the cave without getting lost, stuck, or hurt. The cave itself and the Old Bell Farm are still there and no doubt attract thrill seekers from all over the world. People hoping and kind of hoping not to catch a glimpse of the Old Bell Witch. Though the witch is said to reside in the area of the Red River in this cave and surrounding areas, it's also said by many that there's still something evil lurking about in the shadows on the land where the Bell Farm was. There's something else there besides the self-proclaimed witch who seems to have lost interest in the family so long ago. As I said in the beginning, I believe this entity chose the form of the Bell's old neighbor and proclaimed itself a witch, as that was just one of the most feared things of that day. If I ever had to call it out or even just speculate though, I think it's something nameless and ancient, a being from before time itself, evil toward and jealous of us and our humanity. We may never know what this thing was or even why it chose the bells to haunt in the first place. What do you guys think in the comments? I heard from a friend who's from this area that there's even a game played where instead of looking in the mirror and calling for Bloody Mary, they instead state, quote, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch," end quote, and she's supposed to show herself and possibly attack the poor, unsuspecting person who had the nerve to challenge whether or not she existed. If you're feeling brave enough, then go ahead and visit. You can take a tour of not only the cave, but an exact replica of the Old Bell cabin. The latter even has some of the original, real items that were in the home when the family was alive and dealing with all of this. I can go on and on with this case, and maybe I'll revisit it at some point as I'm actually still researching, but for some reason, and I have no clue why, I've gotten like 20 emails and messages of people, of you guys, begging me to do a video on this. It's weird. Ever since a few nights ago, I've been asked to tell the quote-unquote real story to the best of my research and ability, so here it is. I've got to please the masses. I've got to please you guys. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please be sure and give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed spending this time with me, again, thank you so much for your patience with all of the echoing and everything else going on. These are the last of the videos though, so that's good news. Subscribe if you haven't already and spread the love by sharing this video. Please go on over to MoonBearOracle and subscribe over there as well. That's my other channel. Very slow startup, but we're going to get somewhere, I promise. Also, I'm head writer for Missing Persons and Mysteries channel, the one that Steve Stockton narrates on. Yes, that one. Go on over there and check that out if you haven't already, and give them a subscribe and some thumbs up as well. Show them some love, right? You can find me on Saturday and Sunday nights from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. on Spaced Out Radio, the After Hour Show with Big Willie Townsend and the Fedorable John Hudson. On Wednesday nights, right here on this channel, I do a one-card pull intuitive oracle reading. First come, first serve basis for anyone who comes in and wants an oracle reading. And I do that from about 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to leave a link, at least one, to every single one of the other live streams I do in case you haven't had a chance to check them out live, in case you missed one. Whatever, go on over, subscribe to those channels as well. Be sure to give those thumbs up. We really do, all of us appreciate the likes. In the description box, you will find links to the Kindle and paperback version of my book on Amazon, Missing the Fae Theory by Gemma Jade. Ways to donate to the channel: PayPal, Patreon, Cash App, and Amazon wish list gift link. If you become a patron for $20 a month or more, you will get a once a month free full personal intuitive oracle reading. I really appreciate all the donations, all of the support that you guys give me on a constant and regular basis. Be kind to each other, guys, and be kind to yourselves as well. Never accept anything less than others being kind to you and treating you with dignity, respect. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.